The latest reports from the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank have downgraded the global economic outlook. Countries across the world, including trade blocs such as the European Union, are stressed by budgetary constraints and policies of governments across the world in balancing the books. So, what kind of therapy should we apply to the global economy after the 2008 global economic meltdown, which started from the United States of America? Did we learn the right lessons and taking the right decisions to make such events never something of the future? My guest is the former Director General of the World Trade Organization and equally served as the pioneer Minister of Finance of the government of Francois Mitterrand. Today he is an honorary president with the Jacques Delors Foundation. Notre Europe. Pascal Lamine, welcome to Globe Watch.
My pleasure.
When you look at the way the European Central Bank is injecting cash into the European economic system, do you think the right decisions were taken concerning the global economy after the 2008 global crash?
My answer is roughly yes. What happened in '08 was a huge financial crisis which generated in the US and which revealed a major problem with over-indebtedness, including in Europe, whether public or private. And this had to be adjusted. It was not sustainable. It exploded because of the US subprime market crisis, but it would probably have exploded on some other occasion. Now, did the proper mix of adjustment, deleveraging of the public and the private sector, and structural reform happen? Probably not. We've probably since then been doing too much on the monetary policy side and not enough on the structural reform side. And that's, I think, what still needs to be adjusted in Europe in order for the European Union economy to regain its sort of medium-term 2 to 2.5 growth potential, whereas for the moment we are roughly at 1.5, which is not enough for Europe.
You started answering my question by saying roughly yes. You know, one of the main causes of the American subprime, it affecting the rest of the world with such a dramatic consequence, was the fact that the global economy largely dependent on the American system. And that problem has not been solved. And you tell me, yes.
No, the origin of the crisis was in the absence of proper regulation of the US financial system. That's why we had this crisis. And the best evidence of that is that we have a country next door to the US, which is Canada, where the financial system was properly regulated and nothing happened. So the real issue was lack of proper prudential financial regulation in the US. And what we tried before that, let's say a number of us, and I was a Sherpa on the G7 for a very long time, was to explain to the US and to the Brits at the time that there was one global industry which was finance, and that this finance global industry needed a global financial regulation. Now, for a long time, the US and UK, notably because of the precedents of London and New York, refused to do that, and this is why it happened. Now, since then, a big effort has been done with the G20 to re-regulate the financial industry, and rightly so.
When you look at the way the dollar regulates the global economy, you agree with me that such a regulation still has potholes. because the global monetary system is tacked on the American dollar, and an increase or a hike of the interest rate simply means redoubling of cost for other currencies across the world for those who had taken debts, for example, African countries, which means that if there is a financial fallout in America today, Charles Ebune sitting here talking to you will be affected.
I think in saying that you are confusing two different things. Monetary issue, which have to do with the value of currencies and the amount of liquidity on the one side, and financial stability,
The point I
safety,
want to send across
thing.
is that
So,
the regulation was partially done. It was not impartially done because part of the problem was solved and the other was left. Why?
I don't agree with that. The reality is that there was no proper financial regulation in the US, and because there was no international constraint, which there should have been on US, Europe, China, Japan, Africa, the whole banking system. And again, this is what's happening since. And by the way, this is why global banks, whether American or Europeans, now have to adjust their business model to a higher cost of capital and equity because they've had to deleverage. Now, you're right in the fact that the US still remain the major economy on this planet and that the dollar is the most traded currency. This is true. It will only change very, very slowly as other currencies like the euro and the renminbi will be part of the system in the future.
I know you as a very well-learned person. Following American politics currently, especially the presidential campaign, you have heard Bernie Sanders of the Democratic Party saying that there are still dark clouds with Wall Street. And you tell me that the house was completely cleaned.
No, what I'm saying is that the house was dirty before '08, and that what the G20 has been doing since is starting to clean it. It takes time. The financial system has to adjust, but I think we now have a safer financial system overall, although I'm not sure what's happened in China, than we had before that, which is a step in the right direction. Now, does this mean that the world economy is fine? No, there are other reasons than purely financial or currency
You just said that
reasons.
we have a safer financial system in the world today. I just wonder what gives you the courage to tell me that we have a safer financial system in the world today when stories of the Panama Papers expose the irregularities involved in the banking system across the world today. When the European Union Commission releases a report and says that yearly the continent loses about plus 990 billion euros, that is close to €1 trillion to corruption and other back marketing.
I mean, again, I don't think you should confuse one issue, which is proper tax and fiscal regulation.
All of that has to do with the banking system.
No. The banking system, you're correct, the banking system is the back office for money of everybody, including corruption, crime, drug, and terrorism. That is true. This money has to go somewhere, and it goes through financial institutions. And there has to be a progress, and there is a progress being made in transparency, in disclosing ownership. I work a lot with Transparency International, with this big NGO that's fighting against corruption. We push for ownership to be disclosed. Now, that's one thing, but it doesn't have to do with the stability of the financial system. Yes, multinationals must be better regulation tax-wise, which is, by the way, again, what's happening with the base erosion and profit shifting in the US.
Transparency International,
I mean,
no doubt.
if the issue is whether the bottle is half full or half empty, what I'm saying is that we're not there yet, but a number of measures under the pressure of circumstances, plus public opinions, and in this area, the disclosure of these Panama Papers was a very good thing in my view, because it helps public opinion pushing on governments to do what they didn't do before.
The last time I interviewed you, it was when you were running for the presidency of Transparency International, which of course you lost. Imagine a world where you were elected president of Transparency International and you have cases like the revelations of Panama Papers exposing offshore banking and financial irregularities. What would have been your best benchmarks in addressing that issue?
I would have done what José Ugaz, who's the present chair of Transparency International, did, which is push for a better regulation, push for more protection for whistleblowers, which we do, push for more disclosure of ownership. Transparency is the only prophylaxis against corruption. I happen to believe that it's also the case for tax evasion, for instance.
You sat in the French Ministry of Finance for so many years as Minister of Finance before heading to the World Trade Organization as Director General. When you look at the economic policies of Francois Hollande, whom you share the same political party, it was even rumored one time that you were to be appointed Prime Minister in the place of Manuel Valls and that you rejected. What will you provide as solutions? Because for the moment, it seems that it is a confused situation.
But the truth is that French economy is not in enough of a good shape to seriously address its problem number one, which is high unemployment, especially among young people, where the rate of unemployment is around 25%, which is far too much for a highly developed country like France. So that's the problem number one. This is the problem which at last the French government is trying to address. Everybody can see the sort of resistances this modernization of the labor market creates, and this is an evidence that it's not easy. I think it's going in the right direction, although in my view, too slowly.
You think it is going on the right direction? There is, of recent, the labor law, which has created a lot of tension and controversy, even within the governing Socialist Party. Not everybody is on the same side of the government, what they call La Loi Cromie, or the lady who is a French Minister of Labor. Do you think the current law is good?
I think this El Khomri legislation goes in the right direction.
If
at
it is,
last,
if it
France is trying to do what other countries who've had problems of this kind have done, which is reform their labor market. We've had this problem for a long time. We haven't done what others have been doing for a long time. At last, we are starting doing it. Now, is the quantum enough? No, not in my view, but better than staying where we were.
You just said that it is the right direction. Why do you think that such a law, which you say is taking the country on the right direction, will be having such controversy and the executive finally settles to bypass parliament to have the law passed through? Because now the government has to use extraordinary executive powers.
No, I mean, the French constitutions allow a draft text to be adopted unless Parliament votes a censure motion. So that's what the French constitution says, and it's been the case that this procedure has been used many, many times since the constitution was voted many years ago. Now, what is true is that the reason why the government did that, which is creating a situation where a majority of Parliament had to censure the government, which did not happen, this option was open to Parliament. Parliament didn't do that. So the legislation went through, and the reason why there was so much opposition is that in general in France, the ones that have a job are more protected than the ones that do not have a job. And that where job creation can take place, which is mostly in small businesses, there had to be some flexibilization of the labor legislation. Again, this is what countries like Spain, Germany, Italy, Netherlands, Belgium, UK did. Why haven't we done that earlier? That's the real question.
You know, the current socialist government in France is moving from one controversial law to another. Before that, it was that of the Minister of the Economy, Emmanuel Macron. Why is it that the current socialist government has difficulties of wooing the French electorate that brought it to power to say, see, look, you brought us to power. These are the right decisions we are taking for you. But on the contrary, it is from one protest to another, or from one protest to a backlash or a withdrawal of legislation. Take the constitutional reform bill, for example.
France is a country, and we all know that, and everybody knows that, where pushing reforms is difficult. Now, the question is whether you push reforms through the left or whether you push reform through the right. Those who are not happy with reform from the left will be even more unhappy from reform from the right. And that's the open question. We have presidential elections a year from now, quite exactly, and the option then will be either you reform center-left like, or you reform center-right like.
You just said that you have elections in less than a year from now, which is true. Will you be running as candidate? Most people know you as Mr. Solution of Europe. You worked with the founding fathers of the current European leadership scheme, people like Jacques Delors, who currently you are honorary president of his foundation. Is Pascal Lamy having intentions as a socialist of dropping his candidate for next year's presidential election?
No, the answer to that is no. Since I left my job at the WTO, I've openly been saying that I'm not in for a government job. I'm too old. I've got many other things to do, and I think France is a place where youngsters, younger politicians, women and men, should step in. Our political system is too old. Most of the ministers which now have big positions were already there 20, 25, even 30 years ago. This is abnormal. We need to modernize. We need to have young people coming in much more than what we've done. And this is one of the reasons why I'm not in for a government job or position.
You were the Director General of World Trade Organization. There is currently a transatlantic trade and investment partnership deal, which has had a series of to and fro's between Brussels and Washington. Where is the problem?
I mean, you're correct. There is a negotiation going on in order to establish a more open system between Europe and US, a sort of transatlantic free trade zone. The problem lies in the fact that, in contrast to the past, where opening trade was about reducing tariffs, opening trade transatlantic is not anymore about reducing tariffs, or mostly not about reducing tariffs, which are already extremely low, but in adjusting levels and administration of precaution for safety of cars, of bumpers, of toothpaste, toys or lighters. And this is a much more complex negotiation. It's a much more complex operation because it is about regulatory convergence rather than just dropping customs tariffs. So this explains why it's complex, it takes time, and public opinion needs to understand why and how adjusting the level of precaution can take place, and the answer to that is upwards and not downwards.
You have had dealings so much with the trade world, and you are in Yaoundé to attend the International Investment Forum. Do you think that our economic tissue, the Cameroonian economic tissue, which you came to talk about, is strong and robust enough to attract international investors?
It all depends what your benchmark is. If your benchmark is the global economy, the answer is no. If your benchmark is African average economy, the answer is yes. So in other words, Cameroon has a comparative advantage over other African economies, including in the region. It's a stable country. The sort of business framework is in relatively good shape, although it could be improved. So my point here has been to try and explain why and how Cameroon can grow this comparative advantage, notably in areas like energy or tourism. If you compare Cameroon to an average world economy, there still is quite a lot to be done, and notably in education, training, fighting against corruption, and the rules-based system.
Where are our major limitations?
I think, again, if we were talking about France a moment ago, I would say it's a bit of the same. The direction is okay. What should be done, I think, is reasonably identified by stakeholders, whether government, business, majority, opposition. The question is the speed of delivery. The speed of delivery is not yet there. It's getting things done, and that's an art which many of us still need to be better at.
What are the major risks facing the global economy today, if you had to classify them, that can crash the global economy again? Is Brexit one of them?
Of course, Brexit, I think, would be very bad for UK, bad for Europe, and hence bad for the world economy. Now, we're not yet there, and I'm trying to help explaining to my British friend that on the trade side, Brexit doesn't make sense. And that's the part I know best. For the rest,
but you
not
see,
for me to decide.
The UK entered the ex-European Economic Community in 1973 after long years of Charles de Gaulle's opposition of the British entering the European single market, which is today the European Union. They were not there before, and that union functioned. So when you tell people like Boris Johnson, the former mayor of London, that a departure will be a catastrophe, they just tell you that history authorizes us to tell you that we're not, first of all, part of this system, and we did not collapse. So what makes it so difficult for it to be dangerous if they leave?
The reason why the Brits joined the European community at the time was to join the single market, because they thought rightly, and that's what experience has proven, that joining the single market was good for the UK economy. It's good for the continental economy because it makes it bigger, and it's good for the UK because they join a bigger group. It's as simple as that. In terms of markets, what matters is size. Now, I don't believe that a UK which would shrink to the size of UK as a market, exiting the European Union, would gain. I mean, in today's world and in tomorrow's world, this is not the right thing to do. They would lose all the advantages they have of belonging, including in international trade deals, to a bloc of 500 million people.
The former Director General of the World Trade Organization and France's former Finance Minister, Pascal, now Honorary President at Jacques Delors Institute, Notre Europe, thank you very much indeed for being guest on Globe Watch. Merci.
Pleasure. My pleasure.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Très bien.
Just heard you talking about adjustment in the currency. Do you propose, for example, so many economists have called on Buhari to do that, to devalue the Naira?
It is not up to me to decide whether...
You said you are speaking from an expert point of view.
Yes,
so from an expert point of view, will you advise the Nigerian government, if you were hired, will you advise them to devalue the Naira, to balance the books?
I'm putting to you that the adjustments needed in the macroeconomic area, on the fiscal side, on the balance of payment side, are necessary in all those countries who are facing this problem. And that may include adjustments of the currency. You know, currencies go up and down everywhere. all the time. So there's nothing about a particular fixed parity at any point in time. Now, how the adjustment of the currency is done is country specific. But whether the Naira should be devalued, you'll have to ask the Nigerians. But if I was sitting in the central bank of Nigeria today, I would definitely advocate for a policy of adjustment of the currency.
Of the currency. What kind of adjustment are you talking about? Devaluation? Why are you afraid to use the word outrightly?
You know, the word is important, but the process is even more important. Some people have one time called devaluation export subsidy and import surcharges. So for me, the word is not important. What is important is adjustment to ensure that the balance of payments responds to the global shocks due to the low oil prices. Now, I'm not afraid of the word devaluation. As finance minister of my country, we're devaluing all the time. Many countries in the world have the currencies go up and down. That is the nature of the things. But if you don't do that, here's what will happen. The currency will find its proper value in the black market. The goods market will be functioning at the proper market price. So if you refuse to adjust the currency, you end up with two situations: the official market and unofficial market. And you end up with distortions which can be very, very damaging in the long term.